The phone is face down on the table, and somehow it still has power over the room. You tell yourself you are not checking it. You tell yourself you are done with that small, humiliating ritual of lifting the screen, seeing nothing, putting it back down, and pretending the nothing does not touch you. But your body knows the truth before your mind does. Your shoulders tighten every time the room gets quiet. Your attention keeps drifting toward the same place, as if silence itself has become a kind of hand on your wrist. And maybe that is the part that hurts most. Not the absence of a message, not even the distance. It is the way his silence has learned how to enter your day and sit in the middle of it like it belongs there. You wake up, and before your feet hit the floor, there is already that small, internal scan. Did he write? Did he think of me? Is this another day where I have to act normal while something in me waits? You make coffee, answer work emails, smile at people, do all the ordinary things that make a life look stable from the outside. But inside, there is a second life running in the background. One where a single notification can lift you, and one where a lack of it can pull the whole day downward without asking permission. That is not a small thing. That is not you being dramatic. That is what happens when another person has been allowed to become the emotional weather of your inner world. And the strange part is that it often does not begin with obvious pain. It begins with hope, with the feeling that maybe this connection means something, with the sense that if you just understand him better, if you wait a little longer, if you do not push too hard, then the silence will open into something clear and loving. So you keep giving the silence meaning. You keep translating it. You keep standing at the edge of a closed door, as if patience alone can turn the handle. But this is only the surface, because his silence is not just about him. It is also about what his silence activates in you. Carl Jung understood something many people still miss. What we cannot see in ourselves, we often experience through other people. We project, we attach, we fill the blank space with the image that best matches our longing. And when a man is emotionally distant, inconsistent, or hidden behind pride, a woman can begin to carry not only his absence, but the whole story she has built around it. She does not only wait for a message, she waits for confirmation that what she felt was real. She waits for relief from uncertainty. She waits for the moment when the outside finally matches the inside. That is why silence can feel so unbearable. It does not merely say, "He is not speaking." It can also whisper, "You do not know where you stand." And for a nervous system that has learned to live on signs, that uncertainty is a kind of alarm. You may tell yourself you are waiting for him, but often what you are really waiting for is the end of ambiguity. Because ambiguity is exhausting. It keeps the mind spinning. It keeps the heart suspended. It makes you reread old conversations, study the timing, interpret every pause, every reaction, every delayed reply, every tiny shift in tone. You become a detective of emotional crumbs. You start looking for meaning in the gaps, because the gaps are all you have. And if you are honest, some part of you does not just want him to speak. Some part of you wants him to finally make the story make sense. That is where the deeper wound lives. Not in his silence alone, but in the part of you that cannot yet tolerate not knowing. This is where Jung becomes important, because what looks like a relationship problem is often also a psychological pattern. Silence becomes a screen. And onto that screen, the unconscious begins to project everything unresolved. The fear of being forgotten, the fear of being replaceable, the fear that love only exists when it is being actively proven, the fear that if you stop reaching, you will vanish from someone's inner world. That fear is older than this man, much older. Sometimes it belongs to an abandonment complex, a wound that formed long before the current relationship ever existed. A child does not need a dramatic event to learn that attention can disappear. Sometimes, all it takes is inconsistency. Sometimes, all it takes is being valued most when you are useful, pleasant, easy, quiet, adaptable. A child learns quickly. Stay available, stay good, stay readable, and maybe the connection stays intact. Later, the adult woman repeats the pattern with much more sophistication. She calls it understanding. She calls it patience. She calls it being emotionally mature. And sometimes, it is all of those things. But sometimes it is also a persona, a mask built around being the woman who does not ask for too much, who does not disturb, who does not make things difficult, who can sense what others need before they say it. That persona can be admired by everyone. It can even make you feel strong for a while. But if you build your identity around being easy to hold, you may slowly abandon the parts of yourself that have needs, edges, anger, and dignity. Then, silence does not feel neutral. It feels personal. It feels like proof that being good was never enough. And that is where the trap tightens. Because once silence starts to hurt, the mind wants to solve it immediately. It wants to know what he feels, what he means, whether he regrets, whether he is thinking of you, whether he is waiting too, whether he is too proud, too wounded, too scared, too confused to write first. The mind wants a story that will restore control. But control is often the wrong question. The deeper question is this: what is this silence doing to your sense of self? Does it make you smaller? Does it make you over-explain? Does it make you doubt your own perception? Does it make you feel responsible for keeping the connection alive by carrying both sides of it? If the answer is yes, then the silence is not just a pause. It has become a structure in which your attention, your hope, and your anxiety are all being fed into the same loop. And loops are powerful, because they feel like love when they are actually repetition. This is one of the most painful places where projection appears. You may be in love with the real man, yes, but you may also be in love with the image your unconscious has placed over him. The image of the man who will finally choose you clearly. The man who will make the waiting worth it. The man whose silence is only temporary, because surely, eventually, he will recognize what you are worth. That image can keep a woman attached, long after the actual relationship has stopped giving her anything solid. Not because she is foolish, because the psyche loves completion. It hates unfinished stories. It hates open doors that never quite close. And if the man in front of you is emotionally avoidant, proud, inconsistent, or simply unable to meet you in a mature way, his silence may activate exactly the kind of longing that keeps you chasing clarity from someone who is not offering it. This is where the ego enters the room. The ego wants to be right. It wants to preserve the story that says, if I understand this correctly, I can manage the pain. So it keeps scanning for signs. It keeps trying to decode the silence, as if decoding itself were the same as healing. But the unconscious does not heal through decoding alone. It heals when the pattern is seen clearly enough that it no longer owns you. There is a moment many women know very well. It is late. The room is dim. The phone lights up, and your body jumps before your mind can catch up. Or worse, it does not light up at all, and your stomach drops in that quiet, familiar way that feels almost physical. You sit there with the screen in your hand, seeing your own reflection in it, and for a second you realize something uncomfortable. You are not just looking at the phone, you are looking at your own attachment. You are looking at the place in you that has given another person the authority to decide whether the day feels open or closed. And that is a painful realization, but also a necessary one, because once you see it, you can no longer pretend the silence is only his. Part of it now belongs to the role you have been playing, the role of the woman who waits, the role of the woman who understands, the role of the woman who keeps the emotional door open, the role of the woman who hopes her steadiness will eventually be rewarded with clarity. But what if your steadiness has become self-abandonment dressed as love? What if your patience has been used to postpone your own truth? What if the real wound is not that he is silent, but that you have been training yourself to survive on less than you need? This is where the shadow begins to speak. The shadow is not just the dark, bad, shameful part of you. In Jungian language, it is everything you have disowned, minimized, or pushed away because it did not fit the version of yourself you wanted to maintain. If you have built a persona around being understanding, then your shadow may carry anger. If you have built a persona around being low maintenance, then your shadow may carry need. If you have built a persona around being calm, then your shadow may carry grief, protest, and refusal. And when the shadow is ignored long enough, it does not disappear. It shows up as exhaustion. It shows up as numbness. It shows up as obsession. It shows up as the strange feeling that you are always one unread message away from peace. That is why silence can become so magnetic. It pulls on the shadow. It exposes the places where you are still waiting to be chosen, still waiting to be prioritized, still waiting to be made undeniable. And if you are not careful, you can start mistaking that ache for destiny. But an ache is not a destiny. Sometimes it is just a wound asking to be seen. There are women who keep checking because the silence gives them a task. If they can just figure it out, they will feel safe again. If they can just understand his fear, his ego, his confusion, his attachment style, his hidden feelings, then the uncertainty will soften. And maybe it will. Understanding can be healing, but only if it leads you back to yourself, not if it keeps you orbiting someone else. Because the truth is, silence is often protected by ego. A man may not write not because he feels nothing, but because writing would require vulnerability. It would require him to step out of whatever inner defense keeps him from being exposed. He may be afraid of rejection, afraid of looking needy, afraid of losing control, afraid that once he reaches out, he will have to face the reality of what he actually wants. The ego likes to preserve dignity, even when dignity becomes a mask for fear. And if you are waiting for him to overcome that fear on your timetable, you may stay suspended for a very long time. That does not mean he does not feel anything. It means feeling is not the same as acting, and acting is not the same as loving well. This distinction matters because many women suffer not only from absence, but from interpretation. They take silence and turn it into a verdict. They tell themselves, if he wanted to, he would. And sometimes that is true enough to be useful, but sometimes the deeper truth is more complicated. He may want and still not know how to show up. He may think of you and still choose avoidance. He may regret and still protect his pride. He may feel your absence and still not have the inner structure to meet it with honesty. None of that makes you wait less. It only makes the waiting more confusing. So the question becomes different. Not, what does he feel, but what does this pattern awaken in me? Because if silence repeatedly pulls you into longing, self-doubt, and overfunctioning, then the relationship is not only revealing his limitations, it is revealing your own old wound around being chosen, being seen, and being safe in love. This is not blame. This is the beginning of consciousness, and consciousness is the first real boundary. A boundary is not only a sentence you say to someone else, it is also the moment you stop handing your nervous system to a person who has not earned that level of access. That sounds simple. It is not simple. Especially when your heart has already attached. Especially when you have imagined a future. Especially when you have given meaning to every small sign of warmth. Especially when you have already told your private self a story about what this could become. But the psyche does not care how beautiful the story is if the reality keeps wounding you. At some point, the body begins to tell the truth. You stop sleeping well. You lose your appetite or eat to soothe yourself. You feel the urge to check his profile, his last scene, his online status, his likes, his activity, his absence. You become hyper-aware of time. You start measuring your worth by how long he takes to notice you. That is not romance. That is a nervous system under strain. And when the body is under strain, the unconscious will often compensate by creating fantasy. Fantasy says, maybe he is just scared. Maybe he is about to reach out. Maybe he is testing me. Maybe this silence means I matter more than I think. Fantasy can be gentle, but it can also keep you trapped in a loop where hope becomes a substitute for evidence. This is where many women lose themselves without realizing it. They are not only waiting for a man, they are waiting for relief from their own internal alarm. And if relief never comes from outside, the alarm grows louder. So what changes the dynamic? Not a trick, not a strategy, not a game of disappearing just to provoke a reaction. What changes the dynamic is the moment you stop using his silence as the measure of your day. That moment may arrive quietly. You may not even announce it to yourself. One day, you will feel the urge to check, and instead of obeying it immediately, you will pause. You will notice the tension in your chest. You will notice the old need to reach outward for reassurance. And you will realize that the feeling is not a command. It is a wave. It rises, it moves, it passes. That is a profound shift, because the day his silence no longer decides your day is the day you begin to recover your center. Not your pride, your center. There is a difference. Pride says, I will not care. Center says, I can care without disappearing. pride hardens, center steadies. Pride performs strength, center actually has it. And this is where Jung's idea of individuation becomes deeply relevant. Individuation is not becoming perfect, it is not becoming cold, it is not becoming indifferent. It is the slow process of becoming more whole by withdrawing the parts of yourself that have been projected outward. In love, this often means taking back the authority you gave to someone else's behavior. It means seeing where you made another person the keeper of your worth, your timing, your emotional safety. That is not an easy realization, but it is a freeing one. Because once you see projection, you can begin to reclaim it. You can say, I thought his silence meant I was unimportant, but maybe it also means that I have been using his attention to regulate my self-esteem. You can say, I thought waiting proved loyalty, but maybe it has also been a way to avoid the grief of letting go. You can say, I thought I was being patient, but maybe I was afraid to face how little was actually being given. These are hard sentences, but they are honest. And honesty breaks spells, not mystical spells, psychological spells, the kind that keep a woman in a half-open doorway, hoping the person on the other side will eventually become who she needs. The doorway is a strong image here because that is where many people live for far too long, neither fully inside nor fully out, neither choosing the relationship as it is, nor fully leaving it behind, just waiting in the threshold, where the imagination can keep the story alive without forcing a final answer. But life does not belong forever to thresholds. At some point, you have to decide whether you are living in reality or in potential. Potential can be seductive. It lets you love the version of someone that only exists in your mind. It lets you postpone disappointment. It lets you keep the door half open without confronting the fact that a half-open door is still a closed life. And maybe that is the part that hurts enough to change you. Not him, you. Because the pain of waiting eventually turns into a question. How much of my life am I willing to hand over to someone who is not meeting me in the present? That question is not cruel. It is mature. It is the beginning of dignity. And dignity changes the way silence feels. Silence no longer becomes a command. It becomes information. Information is not emotional law. It is just data. It tells you something about availability, capacity, interest, fear, pattern, timing. But it no longer gets to decide your mood for the entire day. That is a different way of living, a calmer way, a more adult way, a way that says, I can notice this without collapsing into it. That is what self-respect looks like in real time. Not a dramatic speech, not a perfect boundary, not a grand exit. Sometimes it looks like putting the phone down and not reaching for it again for an hour. Sometimes it looks like not rereading the message for the 10th time. Sometimes it looks like refusing to build a future out of someone's inconsistency. Sometimes it looks like letting the silence be exactly what it is, silence. And yes, there may be grief in that, because when you stop feeding the fantasy, you also grieve the hope attached to it. You grieve the imagined version of the relationship. You grieve the story where his silence was only a phase, and his eventual clarity would make everything worthwhile. Grief is part of the process. It is not a sign that you are doing it wrong. It is a sign that you are finally meeting reality without anesthesia. That meeting can feel brutal at first. Then, slowly, it can feel clean. Like opening a window after a room has been too full of stale air. You start noticing yourself again. Your own thoughts, your own rhythm, your own preferences. The parts of you that got smaller because they were always listening for him. The parts that want music, movement, laughter, work, rest, peace, conversation that does not require decoding, affection that does not require begging. And something subtle happens when you reclaim those parts. The silence loses its throne. It may still be there. The messages may still be delayed. The pattern may still exist, but it no longer occupies the center of your inner world. It becomes one event among many, not the ruler of your emotional state. That is freedom. Not noisy freedom, not performative freedom, quiet freedom. The kind that does not need to announce itself because it is felt in the body. In the easier breath, in the less frantic checking, and the way your mind begins to return to your own life instead of orbiting his absence. If this names something you have never been able to say out loud, write a single sentence for yourself in your own words. Keep it simple. Keep it honest. Something small enough to be true, because truth does not need to be dramatic to be powerful. And here is another truth. When a woman stops chasing silence, she does not become less loving. She becomes more available to real love, the love that can exist without confusion as its foundation, the love that does not require her to shrink, over-explain, or perform emotional labor for two people, the love that meets her as a whole person, not as a convenient source of warmth. That kind of love begins when self-abandonment ends, not when he finally texts, not when he finally explains, not when he finally regrets enough to come forward. Those things may or may not happen. You do not have to build your peace around them. Your peace can begin now, in the middle of the silence, by refusing to let absence define your worth. That is the turning point, not the moment he speaks, the moment you stop letting his not speaking decide who you are. And once that happens, even the old scene changes. The phone is still on the table, the room is still quiet, the night window is still dark, but you are no longer sitting there as a woman waiting to be rescued from uncertainty. You are sitting there as a woman who has started to recognize the shape of her own life again. Maybe he comes back, maybe he does not. But if he does, he will meet someone different. Not colder, not harder, clearer. A woman who no longer confuses waiting with devotion. A woman who no longer hands her center to silence. A woman who can care without collapsing. A woman who knows that love without dignity is too expensive. A woman who has learned that the deepest message is not the one he sends, but the one she finally sends to herself. I do not chase what teaches me to abandon myself. Let that sentence settle somewhere inside you, not as a slogan, as a boundary, as a return. Because the truth is, his silence was never the final authority in your life. It only felt that way while a part of you was still giving him that power. The day you take it back, the day you stop organizing your emotions around what he does or does not do, you begin to hear something quieter and far more reliable, your own voice. And it does not demand that you become bitter. It does not demand that you stop feeling. It does not demand that you win. It only asks that you come home. So tonight, if the phone is silent, let it be silent. Let the silence be what it is, without turning it into a verdict. Let your body unclench a little. Let your breathing slow. Let the room belong to you again. Because the real turning point was never his reply. It was the moment his silence stopped deciding your day.